In the final chaotic days of World War II, as the Third Reich crumbled around them, Nazi officials scrambled to hide their most valuable assets. Gold bullion, priceless artworks, and stolen treasures were hastily moved from Berlin as Soviet forces closed in. Among these desperate evacuation efforts was one of the most intriguing mysteries of the war's end: the disappearance of Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop's gold reserve. 15 tons of gold bullion moved on his orders in April 1945. Of that massive fortune, 6.5 tons simply vanished. Today, we're going to unravel the mystery of Ribbentrop's gold, explore the castle where it was hidden, examine what happened in those final days of the war, and ask the question, where is it now? But before we dive into this incredible story, let's understand who Joachim von Ribbentrop was and why he had access to such an enormous fortune in the first place. Joachim von Ribbentrop was not your typical Nazi leader. Unlike many in Hitler's inner circle who came from military backgrounds or were early Nazi Party street fighters, Ribbentrop was a businessman and socialite. Born in 1893, he served in World War I, then became a successful wine and spirits importer. He married into wealth and cultivated connections with Germany's upper classes. The von in his name wasn't even legitimate nobility. He had it adopted from a distant relative to sound more aristocratic. Ribbentrop joined the Nazi Party in 1932, relatively late compared to the old guard. But he had something Hitler valued: international connections and a veneer of sophistication. He spoke English and French, had traveled extensively, and knew how to navigate high society. Hitler, always conscious of Germany's image abroad, saw Ribbentrop as someone who could represent the Nazi regime to the world. In 1938, Hitler appointed Ribbentrop as foreign minister, replacing the more traditional diplomat Konstantin von Neurath. It was a disastrous choice from a diplomatic perspective. Ribbentrop was arrogant, pompous, and deeply disliked by other diplomats. The British Foreign Secretary once described him as having the complete Nazi mind. His negotiating style was inflexible and aggressive. He told anyone who would listen that he understood the British because he'd lived in London, though in reality his time there had taught him nothing about British politics or character. Despite his diplomatic failures, Ribbentrop remained close to Hitler throughout most of the war. He was one of the few who could access the Führer regularly. And with that access came power, privilege, and control over significant resources, including the Foreign Ministry's gold reserves. Now you might wonder, why did the German Foreign Ministry have 15 tons of gold? This wasn't unusual for the time. Gold was the ultimate reserve currency, used to pay for imports, fund espionage operations abroad, pay diplomats in foreign countries, and grease the wheels of international dealings. Every major nation maintained gold reserves. But by 1945, with Germany surrounded and facing certain defeat, this gold became not a tool of diplomacy, but a target for survival. Let's talk about Ribbentrop's castle, because this is where our story really begins. Schloss Fuschl is a stunning property located at the western end of the Fuschlsee, an alpine lake about 20 miles from Salzburg in Austria. Picture a fairy tale setting: crystal clear water surrounded by mountains, forests, and the kind of scenery that appears on postcards. The castle itself was originally built in 1450 as a hunting lodge for the Prince Archbishops of Salzburg, the powerful church leaders who ruled this region for centuries. By the 1930s, the castle had passed through various hands and was owned by the Thyssen family, specifically Gustav Edler von Remitz, who had married into this branch of the famous German industrial dynasty. Von Remitz was a monarchist and an Austrian fascist, but importantly, he was anti-Nazi. When Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, in what the Nazis called the Anschluss, von Remitz's political views made him an enemy of the new regime. He was arrested and sent to Dachau concentration camp, where he died. His castle was confiscated. This is where Martin Bormann enters our story. Bormann was Hitler's private secretary and one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. He controlled access to Hitler and managed the Führer's personal affairs. Bormann was also deeply paranoid about potential rivals. He didn't want other Nazi leaders living too close to Hitler's mountain retreat at the Obersalzberg, but he also needed to keep them close enough to be useful. So when the beautiful Schloss Fuschl became available, Bormann had the perfect solution: give it to Ribbentrop. The castle was located only about 30 kilometers from the Obersalzberg, where Hitler and other top Nazis maintained private residences. Close enough for Ribbentrop to attend meetings and be on call, but far enough away to satisfy Bormann's paranoid need to keep rivals at a distance. It was a brilliant political move that kept Ribbentrop both accessible and contained. Ribbentrop didn't just take over the castle, he improved it extensively. A boathouse was constructed on the lake. A 2-kilometer promenade was built. An SS guardhouse was erected for his RSD bodyguard unit, the Reichssicherheitsdienst, the elite bodyguard service that protected top Nazi leaders. The castle became a venue for important diplomatic meetings. Count Ciano, Italy's foreign minister and Mussolini's son-in-law, visited there. Other foreign dignitaries were entertained in this Alpine paradise, even as Europe burned. For Ribbentrop, Schloss Fuschl represented his status, his power, and his proximity to Hitler. It was his private kingdom, and in April 1945 it would become the hiding place for a fortune in gold. By April 1945, the war was unmistakably lost. Soviet forces were hammering at the gates of Berlin. American and British forces were sweeping across Western Germany. Hitler was holed up in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, issuing increasingly delusional orders to armies that no longer existed. The Nazi leadership knew the end was coming, and each man began making plans for his own survival. Ribbentrop's position had weakened considerably by this point. Hitler had grown tired of his foreign minister's failures and bombastic personality. There were rumors that Ribbentrop might be dismissed or even arrested, but he still retained enough power to issue orders to the foreign ministry, and in April he gave a crucial command: move the gold reserves. 15 tons of gold bullion, known as the Ribbentrop Gold Fund, needed to be evacuated from Berlin immediately. The Soviets were advancing rapidly, and if they captured the foreign ministry buildings, everything inside would fall into their hands. Ribbentrop ordered the gold divided and sent to several locations across what remained of German-controlled territory. Think about the logistics of this operation for a moment. 15 tons of gold. That's 15,000 kilograms, or over 33,000 pounds. Gold is extraordinarily dense, one of the densest elements on Earth. A single gold bar, roughly the size of a brick, weighs about 12 kilograms, or 27 pounds. 15 tons would be approximately 1,250 such bars. You'd need multiple trucks to move it, fuel that was desperately scarce, and guards to protect it on roads that might be strafed by Allied aircraft or blocked by refugees. The fact that they managed to move it at all speaks to Ribbentrop's remaining influence. The gold was divided as follows. 2 tons went north to Schleswig-Holstein, near the Danish border. This area would be captured by British forces in early May. The gold was allegedly turned over to British authorities, though records of this transaction are frustratingly vague. What happened to those 2 tons remains unclear. 3 tons went south to the shores of Lake Constance, on the border between Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. From this consignment, about 2/3 of a ton was smuggled across the border into Switzerland, to the city of Bern. Switzerland, neutral throughout the war, had become a haven for Nazi assets. Swiss banks asked few questions about deposits made by German officials. Some of that gold may still be sitting in Swiss vaults today, its origins carefully obscured by banking secrecy laws. 4 tons were distributed to various German embassies abroad. This gold was meant to fund continued operations, pay diplomats, and possibly finance escape routes for Nazi officials. Some embassies turned their gold over to local authorities after Germany's surrender. Others may have simply kept it, with individual diplomats using it to start new lives in foreign countries. And finally, the largest single consignment. 6.5 tons were sent to Ribbentrop's castle, Schloss Fuschl. This was meant to be a secure location, deep in the Austrian Alps, far from the fighting. It was close to the Obersalzberg, where Hitler's government in exile might theoretically continue operating. And it was Ribbentrop's personal property, where he had loyal staff and SS guards. It seemed like the perfect hiding place. It would prove to be anything but. On May 5, 1945, Schloss Fuschl was captured by American forces. Specifically, it was taken by Troop C of the 121st Squadron, U.S. 106th Cavalry Regiment, part of the reconnaissance element of the 3rd Infantry Division. Salzburg had fallen the day before, along with Hitler's mountaintop home at the Obersalzberg. The war in Europe was in its final hours. Germany would officially surrender on May 8th. The American troops had gone forward to Fuschl following reports that another U.S. unit had been attacked by SS troops in the area. When they arrived at Ribbentrop's castle, they found it abandoned. The SS guards had fled. But there was an immediate problem. The 6.5 tons of gold that had been stored in vaults beneath the castle were gone. The Americans began investigating immediately. They questioned locals, searched the castle and surrounding buildings, and tried to piece together what had happened in the final days before the German surrender. What they discovered was that the gold had been hastily removed from the castle shortly before American forces arrived and buried at 2 nearby locations, the villages of Hintersee and Bad Gastein. Bad Gastein is a spa town in the Austrian Alps, known for its hot springs and dramatic mountain scenery. It's about 70 kilometers from Schloss Fuschl, perhaps an hour's drive through mountain roads. In the chaos of late April 1945, with Allied forces advancing and German authority collapsing, someone had organized the evacuation of the gold from Ribbentrop's castle and arranged for it to be buried in Bad Gastein. The gold was hidden in 3 large metal-lined boxes, buried approximately 3 feet, or 1 meter, below ground level. Some was buried beneath the house of the former mayor of Bad Gastein. More was concealed beneath a nearby house. These weren't sophisticated hiding places, but in the final days of the war, with everything in chaos, a quick burial was probably the best that could be arranged. The American investigators located this gold on June 15, 1945, more than a month after the German surrender. Soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division's 15th Infantry Regiment and 121st Cavalry Squadron loaded it onto trucks and transported it to Castle Klesheim, which served as the 3rd Infantry Division's headquarters. There, it was inventoried and stored. But here's the critical problem. Of the 6.5 tons of gold that had been sent to Schloss Fuschl on Ribbentrop's orders, only a fraction was recovered. The exact amount found in Bad Gastein isn't clearly stated in available records, but it was significantly less than 6.5 tons. So where did the rest go? For SS officers facing war crimes trials and probable execution, this gold represented a chance at survival, a new identity in South America or the Middle East, a comfortable exile. For German civilians who had lost everything in the war, a single gold bar could mean the difference between starvation and survival. For American soldiers who had been away from home for years, earning military pay while risking their lives, the temptation must have been enormous. And that brings us to one of the darker chapters in the story of the war's end: the looting and misappropriation of Nazi assets by Allied forces. We need to be clear about something. The vast majority of Allied soldiers were honest men doing their duty. They fought bravely, behaved honorably, and wanted only to go home. But among any large group of people, there will be those who succumb to temptation, especially when millions or billions of dollars in gold, art, and other valuables are suddenly available with minimal oversight. And in the chaos of 1945, with Germany and Austria in ruins, government authority collapsed, and everyone focused on more immediate concerns like feeding refugees and maintaining order. There was ample opportunity for things to go missing. The case of the Hungarian gold train is particularly instructive and disturbing. Just before American forces reached the town of Bad Ischl in Austria, not far from Schloss Fuschl, a train arrived from Budapest. It had been evacuated by the SS ahead of the advancing Soviets and was loaded with crates of gold and other valuables that had been stolen from Hungarian Jews. This was Holocaust plunder, property seized from victims before they were murdered. The train was handed over to the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, or CIC. They made a careful inventory of the contents and passed them to officers of the U.S. Military Government Property Control in Salzburg. At the time, the gold and other assets were valued at $3 million. In today's money, hundreds of millions. The plan was to return this property to Jewish organizations who would attempt to find original owners or their surviving family members. But only $30,000 worth of property was ever returned to Jewish organizations. The rest, essentially all of it, simply vanished. Years later, investigations revealed that American officers had systematically looted the train. They took gold, jewelry, art, furs, and other valuables. Some of it was sold. Some was shipped home to the United States. Some was used to finance comfortable lifestyles in post-war Europe. It was a shameful episode that demonstrated how even liberating armies could become corrupted by the enormous wealth they encountered. This wasn't an isolated incident. At the 3rd Infantry Division headquarters at Kassel-Klesheim, where some of the Schloss Fuschl gold was taken in June 1945, contemporary reports described a rather casual and unprofessional atmosphere regarding captured gold. A newspaper report from June 1945 noted that the Provost Marshal, Major Roman E. Clem, was using one of Ribbentrop's 1-kilogram gold bars as a paperweight on his desk. Such a bar would be worth about 40,000 pounds, or $50,000 today. Using it as a paperweight suggests a blasé attitude toward captured Nazi assets that probably facilitated theft. American records do not show the Schloss Fuschl gold arriving at either the U.S. Foreign Exchange Depository in Frankfurt or the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington, D.C., where captured Nazi gold was supposed to be sent. This suggests that somewhere between the initial recovery in Bad Gastein and the intended final destination, the gold disappeared. So what really happened to Ribbentrop's missing gold? We can't know for certain, but we can construct several plausible scenarios based on available evidence. Local stories persist of SS men dumping crates into the lake in the final days before the American arrival. This isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Several Alpine lakes have become famous as possible repositories of Nazi treasure. Lake Toplitz in Austria is particularly notorious. Numerous diving expeditions have been mounted to search its depths for everything from gold to documents to prototype weapons. The idea was that if the Nazis couldn't keep their valuables, they'd rather sink them than let them fall into Allied hands. Perhaps they hoped to retrieve them later, after the political situation stabilized. Or perhaps it was simply spite, a final gesture of defiance. The problem with this theory is that gold is heavy and sinks quickly. If large amounts were dumped in Lake Fuschl, they should be detectable with modern sonar and diving equipment. While the lake is deep in places, it's not impossibly deep. Metal detectors could sweep the bottom. Yet no major discoveries have been reported, suggesting that if gold is there, it's either buried in sediment or the amount is smaller than the stories suggest. The gold recovered at Bad Gastein represented only part of the consignment sent to Schloss Fuschl. What if the rest was buried elsewhere, in locations that were never revealed, or were revealed only to people who died before recovering it? The Austrian Alps are full of caves, old mines, abandoned military bunkers from World War I, and remote valleys. During the war's chaotic final weeks, SS officers or foreign ministry staff could have buried gold in dozens of locations. drawing maps or memorizing landmarks, intending to return after things calmed down. But then they were captured or killed, or decided it was too dangerous to return. Or they did return but couldn't find the exact spot. After a few years, landscapes change, memory fails, landmarks disappear. There are documented cases of this happening with other Nazi treasure hoards. Someone buries gold under a distinctive tree, gets captured, spends years in a POW camp, returns to find the tree has been cut down, and they can't remember exactly where it was. If gold was buried in and around Bad Gastein, word would have spread among the local population. In the post-war chaos, with the Austrian economy shattered and people desperate for anything of value, gold coins and bars would have been irresistible. The document mentions that gold coins kept turning up in the Bad Gastein area for decades after the war. This suggests that at least some of the missing gold did end up in local hands, found by farmers digging in fields, construction workers excavating for new buildings, or people who had seen where it was buried and returned later to claim it. If this happened, the gold would have been sold or melted down over the years, dispersed across Austria and beyond, impossible to trace. A farmer might have found a few bars, sold them to a dealer in Salzburg, who melted them down and sold the gold to jewelers, who made it into rings and necklaces that now sit in safety deposit boxes across Europe. The gold still exists, but its Nazi origins have been erased. When the castle was evacuated and the gold buried, this wasn't a spontaneous decision. Someone organized it. Someone knew where the gold was going. That someone was probably a member of Ribbentrop's staff, a foreign ministry official, an SS officer assigned to guard the castle, or a trusted servant. These people had the knowledge, access, and motivation to move the gold. After the war, if they avoided prosecution or were released after short prison terms, they might have returned to recover what they'd hidden. With 6.5 tons of gold as motivation, someone might wait years for the right opportunity. They might recover it gradually, taking a few bars at a time to avoid attention. They might have used the gold to start new businesses, buy property, or fund new lives abroad. Some former Nazis did exactly this, using looted assets to establish themselves in Argentina, Chile, Spain, or the Middle East. Given what we know about the Hungarian gold train and the casual attitude toward captured gold at Castle Klesheim, it's entirely possible that American personnel simply stole substantial amounts of the Schloss Fuschl gold. Officers or soldiers involved in the recovery operation could have skimmed off bars before the official inventory. They could have massively underreported what was found. They could have arranged for some crates to be lost in transit between Bad Gastein and Castle Klesheim. This wouldn't require a massive conspiracy, just a few individuals in the right positions willing to risk court-martial for enormous financial gain. And with the chaos of post-war Europe, the lack of clear paperwork from the German side, and everyone's focus on more pressing matters, it might have been surprisingly easy. The gold could have been smuggled back to the United States, sold in Switzerland, or used to fund black market operations. What happened to Ribbentrop himself? He didn't stay at Schloss Fuschl to defend his gold. By late April, he had fled north, trying to reach Admiral Dönitz, who Hitler had designated as his successor. Ribbentrop hoped to retain a role in whatever government emerged after Hitler's death. But Dönitz wanted nothing to do with him. Ribbentrop was too tainted, too associated with Nazi foreign policy failures. Ribbentrop went to ground in Hamburg, trying to hide in the ruins of the devastated city. He was eventually identified and captured by British forces on June 14, 1945. He was put on trial at Nuremberg as one of the major war criminals. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He had signed orders for the murder of Allied airmen, had been involved in planning aggressive war, and had supported the Holocaust. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. On October 16, 1946, Ribbentrop was hanged at Nuremberg prison. He was the first of the condemned men to mount the scaffold that night. His last words were reportedly, "God protect Germany. My final wish is that Germany's unity shall be preserved, and that understanding between East and West will come." Then he fell through the trapdoor. Even at the end, Ribbentrop never revealed what happened to his gold. Either he didn't know it had been moved by subordinates and he'd lost track of it in the chaos, or he kept the secret, perhaps hoping it might somehow benefit his family or be recovered by loyal followers. If he did know, he took that knowledge to his grave. Schloss Fuschl still stands today. It's now a luxury hotel, part of a collection of high-end properties. Guests can stay in the same rooms where Ribbentrop entertained Nazi officials and foreign diplomats. They can walk along the lakeshore where SS guards once patrolled. They can look out over the same spectacular mountain views that Ribbentrop enjoyed in the brief years when he thought the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. The hotel's website mentions the castle's history, though they naturally don't emphasize its Nazi connections too heavily. The mystery of the gold adds an element of dark romance to the location. Guests probably wonder if there's still gold hidden somewhere on the property, buried in the gardens or sealed up in some forgotten basement room. Hotel staff have certainly been asked about it thousands of times. But if any gold remains at Schloss Fuschl, it's kept its secret for nearly 80 years. And there's one more tantalizing detail to close our story. In August 2015, a 16-year-old German girl was paddling in the Königssee, a famous lake near Hitler's former home in the Obersalzberg, not far from Schloss Fuschl. The Königssee is extraordinarily clear, with visibility sometimes reaching 20 or 30 feet down. The girl happened to glance down, and there on the lake bed was something glinting in the sun. She dove down and retrieved it. It was a 500-gram gold bar. At 2015 prices, it was worth about 20,000 pounds, or $25,000. Nobody knows how it got there. Was it thrown from a boat in May 1945? Was it dropped accidentally by someone transporting Nazi assets? Was it part of a larger cache that's still down there somewhere? The authorities investigated, but found no other gold. Under German law, because she found it in a public waterway and it couldn't be traced to a specific owner, the girl got to keep it. And it makes you wonder, if one gold bar could survive 80 years at the bottom of a lake, only to be found by accident, how much more is still out there? How many secret caches remain undiscovered in Alpine lakes and mountain caves and beneath old houses in Austrian villages? The hunt for Nazi gold continues to this day. Metal detector enthusiasts scour the Alps every summer. Treasure hunters study old maps and documents, interview elderly locals who might remember stories from their grandparents about where SS men were seen in May 1945. Occasionally, something turns up. A few coins, a single bar, remnants of the massive wealth the Nazis looted and tried to hide as their empire collapsed. But Ribbentrop's gold, the 6.5 tons that vanished from Schloss Fuschl in the spring of 1945, remains one of World War II's great unsolved mysteries. It's probably scattered now, some at the bottom of Lake Fuschl, some still buried in the mountains, some melted down and dispersed, some sitting in collections or bank vaults with no indication of its dark origins. Perhaps a small portion remains intact somewhere, waiting to be discovered by some lucky person who happens to be in the right place at the right time. The story of Ribbentrop's gold reminds us that history isn't always neat and tidy, with clear endings and all questions answered. Sometimes the mysteries remain unsolved, the treasures stay hidden, and we're left with fragments and speculation and the endlessly fascinating question, what if? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's enduring mysteries, please consider subscribing to the channel. And who knows, maybe one of you will be the person who finally solves the mystery of Ribbentrop's missing gold.